Welcome to another episode of the Meaningful Shit Show. Today we're talking about toxic masculinity. It's a deep topic. It took me many weeks of research, reading books to really figure this out. Some of the topics that I've talked about in the past already was quite deep in, and this is one that I started as confused as many of you probably are. And this is maybe the fourth, fifth time that I'm recording this because every time I do it, there's new insights. So this is going to be the last one, hopefully.
Welcome to the Meaningful Shit Show with your host, Vincent. In a world full of selfishness, blaming, and scapegoating, Vincent aims to inspire inner work with deep topics and insights on emotion regulation, personal development, psychology, philosophy, and the trauma growth healing process.
So, especially in the current political climate, everybody is talking about toxic masculinity. But what is it exactly? What is the inverse, non toxic masculinity? Do toxic men think some political leaders, Andrew Tate, etc., do they actually get all the sex, rule the world, get the money, etc., etc.? So, is being a non toxic man just being like a weak man or a soy boy or sneaky fucker? Or can't we just point at that group of the evil guys over there? And do we need to actually point the fingers to ourselves as men? How are we toxic, common everyday men, without looking at caricatures like Andrew Tate and Donald Trump? As women as well, how are we enabling the system of toxic men, patriarchy? Do you sometimes do things you know to be ineffective, but just because it's part of your script, it's how men are or women are? So in this episode, we're going to open the man box and we're going to peek inside. I'm going to try to lead into no shaming. I don't like shame. I don't like shaming. Don't think it's effective. We're going to map out how boys are taught to disconnect from their own hearts, how porn and party scripts hijack sex, how pain hides in plain sight, and how we can actually walk a path forward that isn't performative in this way. All right, take a breath, drop your shoulders, notice what's alive in your body right now, heat in your face, tightness in your chest, or nothing at all. Whatever shows up, let it. Stay with it. That's step one. Let's start by deconstructing the man box or even defining it. So, masculinity doesn't hand you a precise manual, it just hands you like a box you have to fit into it. Justin Baldoni coined that term. It's a definition of masculinity that to fit into forces you to wage a certain type of war against yourself. You have to numb your feelings, you have to sever yourself from them, you have to ignore insecurities, you have to ignore shame, you have to put on a mask, put on a full suit of armor to protect yourself from incoming attacks. You don't get to decide what's in it, you just get punished if you don't fit. From the moments we're little boys, the code is police. Don't cry, don't look weak, don't act like a girl. And now it's defined by the Brennan Masculinity Scale in 1976, which I find hilarious. No sissy stuff. Be a sturdy oak. Be the big wheel and give them hell. Well, it's a little outdated terminology, maybe, but no sissy stuff. Like anything that's feminine, don't do that. You don't want to do that. Again, like I'm not recommending this. I am telling you what the Brennan Masculinity Scale entices. Sturdy oak. So this is the stoic front, the unperturbed man. Nothing, disturbs you. The big wheel. This is focused on providing, uh, keeping that moving forward no matter what, and give them hell. The competitive mindset of masculinity. I am not a fan of this masculinity scale, and luckily, since 1976, some things have progressed. Sociologist C.J. Pascoe calls it the fag discord. It's not about sexuality, but anything that steps out of the script. If you drop a sandwich, you're a fag. If you read too much, you're gay. It's vague on purpose, right? Like you don't know why, but suddenly you're a pussy. You're like, the word itself is a leash, and it's not just fag. I would say like it's fag, pussy, your mangina. Like, do you need to change your tampax? Like these kinds of things, right? That if you are a man, you kind of like know how it is in groups of toxic men, right? We have to deal with it, and maybe you participate. Maybe I have participated in the past. And why do we do that? The word itself is a leash. It doesn't matter what you do. You just know that if you break the code, you'll be shamed back inside the box because then you're not a real man and you'll be outed from your group. And that is the one thing as humans, social creatures, that we don't want. We don't want to be ostracized. And we internalize these things very fast, right? My standards are a little different. So I grew up Dutch, although I'm on the west coast of the US right now in Los Angeles. So it's a different culture. I grew up, a different set of materials, but I would say that there is still a box there, the European or the Dutch box. The Dutch may have the reputation to be direct, but that reputation doesn't apply to all domain. And in my experience, rage, anger, stoicism is as much romanticized and pushed upon boys as here in the US. And then my upbringing was non-standard. I would not say that I had a standard Dutch upbringing. I lost my mother very early. I lost my mother to cancer before I even turned 2. You can imagine the shock that brought to myself, my family, my dad, my sister, and what the losing of that mother role did. So to a certain extent, that made it even harder for me. You can imagine that in my life leading up to it as well. If a disease like that is part of your family, that's not just, that had been going on for a good amount of time before. And, so there was lots of stress and, of course, that disconnection that partially was because of the disease, but of course also because she eventually passed away and everything that happened afterwards. So it was before, it was afterwards as well. My dad got a new partner, my stepmother who raised me. And there is mad gratitude I have for elements of my childhood, but many moments were dark, isolating, confusing, neglectful, very neglectful, and not emotionally nurturing at all. Emotion regulation is not something that we talked about. Very stoic, very aristocratic, very, you got downstairs to perform, put on a good face, and then, so it was weird. I would say that it was very compartmentalized. So sort of like a say A to B. Vulnerability was not in the vocabulary. Whenever tough feelings were discussed, it was often a ginormous explosion that was never talked about afterwards. If you've seen Downton Abbey, if somewhere, I think it's one of the first seasons, there's one of the lords that like break down, cries in front of his manservant, and it felt like the same pattern. Like, yes, we are all human, we break down, but in the Downton Abbey world and my upbringing world, things were never talked about again, which of course is a very confusing message for someone that's trying to figure out life. There's actually like sort of two lessons there. One of the lessons is like there's no lesson in emotion regulation because before that explosive emotion occurs, you don't know what's going on. It's being repressed until it like comes out. And then after it comes out, it's just complete explosion untethered. There's no regulation. There's no distress tolerance, to use DBT terms. So yeah, there's not a lot of useful things that I learned there. So I had to all do that later in life. Another important part of the man box, of course, is the domination or competitiveness. Give him hell. As I gained more steam in life, I became more competitive. My teenage years were honestly as challenging as they come, but in my 20s, I gained some steam through a combination of luck, effort, and talent. I completed my master's degree in software engineering. I was working in the tech field already. And in my early 20s, I had a stable paycheck, had a girlfriend, we bought an apartment, and I thought I achieved manhood, that I now could, give him hell. That thing, that I was now where in my teenage years it wasn't as part as I maybe tried to like live out the man script more or less, but competitively I just didn't really get there. Now I was getting there. But did that change how I was handling feelings? No, I wasn't really vulnerable. I was just hiding behind a mask of stoicism. Did I self-medicate with pornography? And did that diminish the intimacy in my relationship? Yes. Did I downplay that? Everybody does that. Yes. Did I try to exert a control over whatever I could? Sometimes with dieting, constricting my food intake just to feel in control and not to become skinny fat. I've always been tall and lanky, and you know, I still, although Dutch culture is different, like I very much equate fat with bad, or that was the message that was taught much more there, I guess, in Europe than here in the US. I'm not completely sure about that. But yeah, that was ironically something that really lived in my household. Although, what funny thing is that my mother was at one point overweight, so that's created another of these like double standards. So, anyways, that relationship I was in actually lasted 11 years, which is great, surprising. But then it ended, partially because of the lack of vulnerability, not really connecting. I don't think that we truly like knew each other deeply for various reasons. I mean, was it my fault? Was it her fault? Little column A, little column B. You know how it goes. But did I learn from that experience? Did that stop me? Did I go like, okay, huh, this relationship went away. Should I change something? No. I doubled down on the man box. More sexual conquest. That's the answer. More competitiveness. You know, I was getting more ahead in life, so now I can do that. I even moved to the US, which is much more competitive. I could expand my career much more. I could work more, earn more money. Started doing athletic, more competitive stuff, running marathons. I did ultras, skiing. I more recently started weightlifting, and there are noble reasons for all of these things. None of those things I'm saying, oh, don't do that because it's part of the man box. No, there's good reasons for it: anxiety management, mind-body connection, longevity. But let's be honest. Is there a part of me that was just acting out the man script, just following out what a good man does and hoping that maybe if I'm big, I'll finally be enough? So, within acting, I'm an actor. We talk about your motivations a lot. So, whenever you're looking at a script or slice of life, as my acting studio calls it, you oftentimes look at what is the core need of the character and what are they masking with. Whenever I look at my life, whenever like I do a thing or something like that, I do have to admit that often the core need that I have is being enough. If I have a really good podcast, maybe I'll be enough. I try to make fun of it, although there is of course a part that's where some of the drive comes from. You got to transmute that in a certain way as well. Anyways, more about competition. Competition trains you in a certain kind of disconnection as well. It's don't feel dominated, even if we're talking about doing something well in work or social media or whatever. It's not necessarily about feeling your feelings, it's about getting the numbers, getting the six-figure salary, or getting the following or the engagement that you want. It's all very left-brained numbers wise. Sociologist Michael Messner calls it a system of failure, though. So for every kid crowned a star athlete, and this, of course, applies to an influencer or a corporate structure or something like that. There's one star, and 100 others walk away believing they're mediocre, invisible, or not man enough. So they're living out the man script, but they're not getting ahead enough, which is sad. The box is relentless. A provider identity, that's another big part of it, right? It was the big wheel. Solving problems, making money, measure your worth in numbers. I certainly have lived this script until the flip side hit. If I'm only worth what I produce, and if I'm stop producing, does that mean that I become worthless? Is my self-worth relying on the production that I do? That's not a strength. That traps you, right? Because that means that you can never let that go. Let's connect it to DBT really quick. I talk about DBT a lot. Marsha Linehan talks a lot about effectiveness as a core skill. It sort of like precipitates through the entirety of DBT. And here, effectiveness is not what feels masculine, not what protects your ego as a man, but what actually works in line with your values. Effectiveness often asks, what's the objective here? What's the relationship that I want to keep? What is the self respect that I want to make sure it doesn't get tarnished? If the goal is connection, if a part of the goal is, then if you have an objective of dominating, of winning, it won't work. If you really go into that domination mindset, check this for yourself. Think about that. Think about even like maybe the some of the movies you've watched of like tough, like I don't know, cowboy men or like whatever. Like think of a good example of a typical role model of a man, this like sturdy character, doesn't get disturbed by anything, etc., etc. Are they doing really well in connection? Is that something that's being displayed? No, they're loners. They're loners. If the goal is self-worth, then reducing yourself to provider, that won't work either. Effectiveness is cutting through the noise of like real men do this and asking, does this action move me towards the life that I want or just deeper into the box? And in other words, what are my values? So if you don't think about that, the values are whatever is the man box, which gets handed down to you. You're just trying to fit into it. You're trying to not be a fag or gay or pussy or like whatever, like these kinds of things. You're trying to people please to a certain extent. But have you thought about what the cost is of staying in that man box? Okay, you get some perks. It is very clear that there are perks. That's being advertised everywhere. More about that later. But what's the cost? And does it bring you true happiness? Is it authentic? These are rhetoric questions. The answer is no. No, it's a myth. It's a myth. I'm sorry to break it to you. So let me put it to you. When you think about your own story, what is your box made of? Is it sports? Is it a paycheck? Is it the armor of I'm fine, I don't have feelings? Or did you just completely give up? And are you into red pill ideology? And harder question here, what have you cut off to stay there? Because the cost of this box is high. I'll say it again. The cost of the box is high. You don't just lose tenderness or creativity or openness, you lose yourself. And then you call it being mature or a real man. This is fucking bullshit. It's so the man box sells you some kind of safety, but it costs you your soul. You're not living your authentic life. You're not connecting. Cool. Well, not so cool actually. Let's move on. Let's talk about porn. So if the man box is the programming, then porn is the classroom. This is the patriarchal promise. This is man heaven. Studies show, though, that nearly 90% of mainstream porn scenes include aggression towards women. Not negotiation, not intimacy, not connection, aggression. And what you grow up with, you mistake that for sex and worse, like something you want and is good for us, like red meat and smoking and not talking about feelings and drinking excessive alcohol, like all these things that a stoic man does. Just jackhammering different types of hot bodies that may or may not have a person attached to it. And while we're at it, same goes for the male actors. Like, think about it. How often do you see the face of the male actor in mainstream porn? I am not beyond that, or beyond is not the right term. For me, porn was a huge comfort blanket. Although Dutch culture told me that sex should be about love and connection, Dutch culture is actually one of the most forward cultures where this is something that's talked about a lot, where it's more normal to have sleepovers with your partner when you're still teenagers instead of just having to do it in the backseat of a car somewhere. So that's great about the culture that I grew up. But uh, Separate from the message of love and connection, hidden away, I absorbed the patriarchal promise in porn because I was exposed to it very early and it brought to me a certain emotional soothing. And guess what happens the in the videos? The girl in the video never says no. So it's risk free. It's risk free. You don't have to do work, and you get what you want. As my usage of porn got deeper, and my relationships with people got shallower and less vulnerable, there was more hidden shame, and it left me just in this split state. Till a number of years ago, I joined a men's group, and I committed to actually doing the real work versus just going for the cheap coping mechanism with lots of harmful side effects. Now, let me pause here again. That was the case for me. That doesn't mean that it's the case for you, right? Like, I'm not hating on this necessarily, although there's, of course, ethical objections, but there's ethical objections to lots of things in life. So what did I switch it out for? And this is actually was a lot of work. If you just have like a coping mechanism and you're trying to find more healthy coping mechanisms, it's a fuck ton of work. I started relying on community, more community for oxytocin, high intensity interval training, weightlifting, cardio for dopamine, serotonin, and cortisol reduction. See my episode about the feel good molecules where I talk about this in detail. You want to have expensive dopamine, not the cheap dopamine by just grabbing your phone and going to Pornhub. You get instant dopamine, or Instagram, or whatever, any of these like dopamine mills, right? You want to use the dopamine for what is actually meant to give you the motivation to do something hard, to work for something, and you get rewarded by dopamine before you get the actual reward, which may take many hours or days or years. So even now, we're 3 years later, where I haven't used any adult media, and I haven't been isolating myself with that. There's still echoes that remains. So this script remains alive, and the lines are blurred. So there's still elements that are seductive of this patriarchal promise, where the girl never says no. And then we have hookup culture. It just amplifies the script, which is also very seductive to me, honestly. In theory, hookups are emotionless. But the research shows, of course, that during hookups, there's a huge orgasm gap. And where it just comes down to, there's not as much enjoyment as the script sells you. It's even so in some of the research in the books that I read, that it's right now the default where both partners assume that the other doesn't want a relationship, but that's not even really true. It's just like the default that's being pushed right now because that's what we're seeing everywhere. And then we have alcohol that makes it messier. Of course, also very associated with masculinity. You eat red meat, you drink, like no matter what time of day it is. So you party, there's blackouts, there's gray areas of consent. I stopped drinking in 2017. One of the reasons being that I'm not a stranger to any of those things. We have a standard, don't rape, but no training in actual sexual ethics, no training in mutual pleasure. Instead, I recommend participating actually mindfully with what you're doing, actually being present with the person in front of me, in front of you. Interesting slip up. Isn't that interesting? That our default is not that, or maybe it is your default, and then that's wonderful. But I don't believe, based on the reading that I've done, that it is the default. There's not a lot of presence. There's performance there, and that is partially because pornography trains disconnection. I would even say dissociating, and mindfulness trains connection. So that's actually quite different. So it's my own reflection, more reflections later, but I think that there's a big patriarchal lie, and that sexual conquest, that's something that's desirable. And once you get that, you have all the power and the money. Does it remind you of the Epstein files? Anyone? So what do you actually want? What is good for you in this context? Am I selling you some kind of uh, stay a virgin until marriage thing? No, absolutely not. Connection and enthusiastic consent. It does not mean vanilla. I'm not a vanilla guy. Go to Burning Man. Go have yourself a threesome. Go to a play or sex party. Buy a chest full of toys. Sex to your heart content, like with someone you actually know, not a parasocial relationship where you're like texting some kind of OnlyFans model, and of course, like some social media managers like replying to your messages, not the person themselves. Parasocial relationship being a relationship with someone you don't actually know, but you feel you have a relationship with them. This happens a lot with celebrities. Like, do you feel like you know Brad Pitt, what he's about? I kind of do. Like, I have a little bit of like a parasocial relationship because of all the things that you know about these people. So, I am not here to tell you to be a prude. Not at all. But I am telling you to communicate and be vulnerable. Can you talk about sex? Can you ask your partner what they like most, even during a hookup or casual connection? Can you talk about what you like? Can you honestly have that conversation? For my supposedly liberal Dutch upbringing, I am not the best at it. Isn't that funny? You can do it, everybody does it, but you can't talk about it. Like, what the fuck's that about? Bell Hooks loved the book that The Will to Change by Bell Hooks. She reminds us that patriarchal sex, so that's all part of like the man script, it's about domination. So there's always a top and there's always a bottom. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with having like power dynamics in sexual play. That's also not the point here. But what is the point is to not see this as a game of domination. All right. So instead of dominating, think first about how can I give? How can I connect? Not what can I get or what can I get away with or how can I do as little as possible? How can I game this situation? This is a message I take to heart. Because sex without presence just becomes performative. So, in your next intimate moment, notice if you're chasing ego or if you're chasing connection. Then choose to give, not get. Boy, let me talk about red pill ideology and hypergamy a little as well. Like this is an episode by itself. But a friend of mine I was talking to him about that said like if you're talking about toxic masculinity, you have to talk about red pill. I was like, okay, well there's a point there. Because if porn is the classroom, then the red pill ideology is kind of like the graduation speech. It takes patriarchy but refuses to play. It does not transcend it. It's still within the script of patriarchy, but it's like the self-chosen loser. Where it's just like, oh, based on the I don't fit in a man box because I don't, have broad shoulders or square jaw or tall, like whatever the fucking reason is. And then projects all of those problems outwards. So it's the chosen loser in the same rat race. It takes all the insecurity, the silence, the orgasm gap, the lack of education, and codifies it into a beautiful little worldview. The red pill tells boys and men women are hypergamous. They will always trade up. They will never be satisfied. They will cheat and leave the moment a better option comes along. So your only chance is to dominate, or you will be dominated. You will end up in a situation that you can't get a partner. Well, that is not intimacy. It's paranoia dressed as philosophy, where there's like some kind of like logical kernel of truth or something like that. And when I say logical kernel of truth, yes, of course, women, and I think the same applies to men, you try to date at the same level or up. There are echelons in dating, but the way that I formulate this now, it's not even that like someone necessarily is like better than you because they're in a higher social class or something like that. It's about a match, right? Like it doesn't mean that if I date someone who is blue collar because I grew up blue collar, and then I date someone who has a white collar job, that they're better, that I'm dating them. Do that's the competitive thinking. Like, is it a match? Are there value matches there? So I don't think that it's the most productive to see it as a hierarchy. It's just like what's familiar and what is a match, and that comes with the context that you are in. But I get the appeal of red pill ideology. If you've been hurt, rejected, ghosted, it is super seductive to find a system that said, "See, it's not you. It's not your fault. It's female nature. It's the women's fault. It's the feminists." But what you gain in certainty, you just lose in your humanity. You stop seeing your partner as a person. You start treating her as a threat, and that's not great for your vulnerability and your connection. Let's talk about covert depression for a bit. So, because the cost of this armor, this man box situation, isn't just bad sex, it's just pain, male pain in general. The script we get seems to imply that we can just be in our manosphere, have power, have money, have sex, do a little bit of raising of a family, like sort of like, in the shop window while you're cheating your ass off, like behind the curtains in the back. And that's the epiphany, and then you win. This is basically, if we look at some of the richest people or the most powerful people in the world, that's like how it is. Like look at Epstein, etc., etc. You just, or the freak out parties. You know, it shouldn't be that much of a surprise that this is something that corrupts. You're doing things because they seem seductive in the short term, and because you get access to them. I think in some situations, in these kind of like parties and like whatever, it's not even necessarily that people want that, but they feel that that's what comes with the territory. And that's the lie. The lie is that we can just bury the fucked up shit that happened to us and just be competitive, like do the things with the big wheel and like whatever, like follow that script dogmatically, and then we'll be okay. We will not be okay. We will be what therapist Terry Real calls covert depressed. So this is much more what you see in what he sees in men, not the overt depression of sadness. It more looks like numbness. You're numbing yourself with something, and that can be work. So, workaholism, it can be addiction, it can be rage, it can be, whatever. For me, I think it looked like overwork, you know, workaholism, grinding out more hours, convincing myself that I was providing and that that was a good thing. And like these crush the competition mantras, anything but actually being present. How hard is it to sit still and meditate? How hard is it to sit still for an hour on your couch? It's like one of the hardest things in the world for me. Like in silence, right? Not watching Netflix or like whatever, but meditating, being present. It's so much easier to just go to work and like punch the clock and, be a wage slave. Not that there, again, I am also a wage slave. There's nothing wrong with being a wage slave, but it's also good to realize what the rat race you're part of is. So anything but sitting still with my own grief, that would be easier. Which, by the way, is the antidote to the male depression, the covert male depression, as Terry Real talks about it. So this is one of the big lessons, and this is not through the research for this episode that that I learned that. my experience has been, because I went through all of the shit that I went through in my earlier years. Then I picked up steam in my 20s, and in my 20s and 30s to a certain extent as well. I really believe, like, if I just like would be able to follow that dogma, follow like that, success is another great way that you can frame that within man box. Think of basically someone who takes success but disconnected to truth to an extreme degree, and you have President Trump, for example. Like, he's just, it's all about the narrative. It's all about being successful, and he doesn't give a shit about what's true. He doesn't give a shit about what he's saying is like, if he's going to say something the next. No, he just cares about being successful. And see that some people see that as a good thing, to just be unapologetically focused on success and, you know, death otherwise. What's the live free or die, success or die, or something like that. The success and the consequences be damned, really was the expression that I was looking for. And that is a way to live. That is a way that you can get respect from some people, that they're in the pyramid scheme of the toxic masculinity, right? Like, because it is not without its spoils. It does give certain perks, the perks we see around us all the time. That's what's being marketed. That this is how it is being part of a multi-level marketing scheme. You don't start like participating in a multi-level marketing scheme without constantly someone telling you, like, hey, if you get to this level, you get these perks and these perks, and you get this for free and that for free, and if you only sell, this is the same thing. It's the same thing. Like, if you keep climbing every like level that you climb in the toxic masculinity pyramid, you get a couple of like more perks, but like you're selling your soul as part of that. Like, none of it is authentic. Oh, I shouldn't say none of it is authentic, but generally when you're in like one of these races, and we do it all the time in like various different things that are important and not important, and as well, like, you're not really connecting it to your values, you're just connecting it to the dogma. Am I being a good little boy and I'm following the dogma? Am I getting to like level 68 masculinity so that I get some extra spoils, so that I get some sex, some extra money, some extra respect, some extra, you know. Whew. So the alternative is actually thinking about these things and actually processing and talking about your grief. Oh my God. Talking about feelings? No sissy stuff, Vincent. No sissy stuff. I'm not going to talk about my feelings. Shit, I don't even have feelings. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm fine. I'm fine. I don't want to talk about that. It's the name of Terry Real's book. I don't want to talk about that. How great of a title is that? But it's the only way of moving through it. To actually, as Brene Brown calls it, call truth to bullshit. Like, even if you're bullshitting yourself, the most powerful bullshit is the bullshit you serve yourself. Don't forget that. And sometimes what is really important to come to terms with is that something that happened to you was fucked up. That was fucked up that happened. There is no justifying that. Caregivers dropped the ball, really dropped the ball on that. And instead of internalizing it as like, that's kind of like how the world works, like, um, like, I'm thinking of examples in Terry Real's books where, you know, men grow up with their dad beating them mercilessly. And instead of not really thinking about that, and it gets internalized into, oh yeah, but that's kind of what you do. And then you repeat the cycle because you're really sad about that. Actually, you know in your heart that it's not right, but you can't admit that to yourself. And then you just end up perpetuating the cycle. And what's hard about the situation is when we're talking about the man box, it's not just stuff that we do to ourselves. It is even us as men. It is also enforced by patriarchal women because also women get substantially less, but get something from the patriarchy, from playing the system. Whenever there's a possible or a powerful system in play, yes, you get little handouts for being a good little boy and playing along. This is what society is called. And then there's generally a large like base that is just being ripped off mercilessly. But if you're like a couple of levels higher, you get like a little handout of whatever is being like funneled up to the top. This is starting to sound like really tinfoil hat kind of things, but it's just I don't think it's that it's that mind blowing all of this, right? This is just kind of like how late stage capitalism sort of works. But let's not go into that too much. I'm not here to hate on late stage capitalism because I don't have a good suggestion to what to do instead. So future episode. So, but when it comes to patriarchal women, so what Bell Hooks notices is that it is actually really hard to give men compassion when they are expressing feelings because men already get so much. And now we have to give them compassion too. No, shut the fuck up, protect me. Like that, I don't want to do that. So that's another component. How about the friendship crisis? So Liz Plank points out that millions of men reporting having zero close friends, and Niobe Way found boys at age 10 describing deep friendships, but by 14 they shut it all down. And why? Fear of being seen as weak or worse, gay or pussy or like whatever, because cultivating relationship, that is something classically that women are better at. The men get some kind of like physical result, do some competition, and women have connection. So guess what? Men end up profoundly alone. What's hard about the situation of toxic masculinity is, and often you're in the situation that the only person that can help you along is your partner, which heterosexual couple is generally a woman. So that makes it even more complicated. That upsets that entire apple cart as well. And if that relationship goes away, or even within that relationship, you can get incredibly lonely. And loneliness is actually something that kills. It's one of the strongest predictors of suicide in middle-aged men. So it's super, super, super important to have support network, which I do. And one of the things that I realized through the research that I did is how grateful I am for that. And not just grateful, it's work. I invest in that network every single week, a couple of hours, maybe 2 or 3 hours, because I have calls, I have conversations, I stay in touch with people. Sissy stuff in a way, because it's connections, right? But that means that if I go through something that's very tough on me and I have some complicated feelings, that if I'm in a relationship, I don't just have the one person that I can go to and I can just like trauma dump all of that stuff on them. No, I have multiple people that I can choose from, not one friend that I always call if like whatever. So, but that's something that you need to invest in, and like nobody tells you that. I mean, nobody told me that. This is not a message that I got from my family. Heck no. Body image, also one interesting one. Justin Baldoni talks about obsessing over wide shoulders after a Men's Health article, and I get it. I've trained for over a decade after not training. Like it's been almost, I guess, 20 years. I started running again when I was like 31. And I do that partially for longevity and for mental health, and this stuff is very important and aesthetics, sure. Partially for validation as well. So but it's important to realize that if you're trying to live up to masculinity through some kind of like blueprint, uh, it sells you a mirror that you can never fill, and body dysmorphia will just be your companion. I actually had a conversation with an acquaintance of mine, yeah, who has been lifting semi-professionally or like really consistently for over 20 years. So he's a tall guy. He's big. Tall guys, it tends to be a little bit harder to put on weight. But he's big, and he confided in me at one point and says like, no, but like already 10 years ago, doctor told me I have body dysmorphia, and I didn't believe him at the time. And over time, like now, he does believe it because how he sees himself in the mirror, he still sees himself as like a scrawny, tall kid. And I can understand. I can understand how that works. I am fortunate to be able to say that I don't I don't have body dysmorphia, but what I do have is that it depends very much on my mood, how the guy in the mirror looks. Right. It depends on the news that I've just had. And my perception of myself can be completely different. Maybe I do have body dysmorphia, but I can manipulate it pretty well. I don't know. How about workaholism? If you remember Brooke and Gary from my last episode, that scene from the feature film The Breakup, featuring Gary, he's arguing because he works a lot and he should just be let off the hook for being present and attentive at home. Does that sound familiar? I have been super guilty of that. And it's a myth often talked about in my therapy group as well. Yes, as a man, or not just as a man, but oftentimes when you're a man, default is that you provide, yes. But let's be honest. Would you work regardless of your relationship? And is working really just an escape? It's like an escape into the manosphere. Because work tends to be a place where you can just go and not feel. Like your boss is not gonna like actually, maybe they're gonna ask you how are you, or like some kind of like surface level shit. How was your weekend? But they really wanna like they do that so that they can go into like sort of the next order of business. They don't want to have like a deep like sharing session with it. Don't that I it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare that that goes to that level. And there tends to not be a lot of complicated emotions in the male workplace. Maybe you get angry and you yell at one of your coworkers or something like that. That's like somewhat acceptable, and that happens, you know. But it's not very challenging. It's very comfortable. It tends to be very comfortable, and sometimes that means that you're just hiding. Sometimes it's just another addiction, something that you just, do so that you don't have to deal with the things you should actually be dealing with. Cool. So let's talk about the path forward. We've torn it down. The entire man box, the porn script, the hidden pain, red pill ideology. So now what? We can't stop at critique, right? So we need a path forward. And I guess as well as like reiterate that I used to think about this topic more as I guess a dogma, like that there was like a dichotomy of you have like the classic um men, which is like more like, like the big wheel and the sturdy oak and like whatever. But that's a crude stereotype. But then there's another stereotype, and that's like more the stereotype that I'm going for because I just, happen to be how do I say that without it sounding pretentious? It's probably just going to sound pretentious, but growing up, one of the things that was of utmost importance was academic prowess. So, like, I mean, I don't think it was ever considered for us to not go to a grammar school, um, which probably is a Dutch thing, but it's like one of the schools where you still get taught ancient Latin, and that it comes with like a certain level of elitism. Really? Oh, I had Latin in school. Okay, wow. I don't know what that was. I think I was something with my pinky up and drinking tea. I don't know. It turned into a Doctor Evil thing. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. It's all good. Um, but that did lead into that I wasn't necessarily as focused on like academic, or I was focused on the academic side of things, but not athletic performance or something like that. That was not like really something that we did as a family. We just like talked a lot. So like until this day, the primary way of like that I use to connect or identify or like identify with is talking. I just realized how ironic it is. I'm saying that on a podcast because yes, here I am, being a talking head, just talking. But yes, this is one of the things I do. I can think about all these different concepts really well and talk about that in a certain way. So I thought about that like two different like sort of like stereotypes, but they're both man boxes in a way. It's not that academic man is completely divorced from like that other type of man, and they're like sort of like related. And how I thought as well, still like in a little bit like way, sort of a way of a hierarchy. Like you know how interesting that is that sometimes that you're because I kind of like was born into like the one box. So that was just like the thing that was handed to me and the culture that I grew up with. But I still at times have the relationship with that other man box, so sort of like the ones that you see in the movies, um, that there was something to be achieved there. And that's the reason I think partially as well. So I started going more into like sort of the athletic or competitive man box once like because as an the academic archetype you can absolutely find provide right you can make a six-figure paycheck no problem that's great if you go in that field especially if you're in STEM or something like that so that's all wonderful but there's something really interesting as I started tearing both of them down, because in a way, it's like the academic man, the slightly more feminine man, felt like something more like, I don't know, evolved in a way, or should I say woke? I don't know. But that by itself becomes like sort of a trap because and it's related to I think this is further down that I talk about it, but I'll talk about it now. So there's something in nature that I learned about at one point. That's called a sneaky fucker. So that's for example happens with orangutans and sea lions, where being a man and having a harem that's like the primary way of like doing it there, like sort of like that's the way that the society is structured. But then there's men that like sort of like sneak in the orangutan world. There's like men that actually look like women, so they're effeminate men, but they can still sneak into the group and then procreate and then just like not deal with all of the work that it takes to be a real man. And that's always like it's a naturalistic fallacy. I know if you look at nature and then say, oh, that now applies to society, like it does not. But it's an interesting concept. It's an interesting concept when you use the fact that you're not that brute, like that, that bigger orangutan or sea lion that is always fighting because that's what they need to do to stay in like sort of control of their harem, so that not no stronger male gets it. But if you then position yourself as like, okay, I'm like this more well-rounded, like feminine type, and I think about things and like whatever. But if you use that just to get an advantage and then to do the same thing as the masculine man does, or just like try to make that a way to get into women's pants, that's what a sneaky fucker is. And then you're just like you're pretending to be a feminist. You're fronting. You're giving the facade of like being this and that and like whatever. But then when push comes to shove, you're kind of like doing the same thing. You're still in the same pyramid. You're still getting like the same. You're trying to get the same rewards, but in a roundabout, like a different way. No, that's that's also in a man box. It's a slightly different man box, but it's still a definition of masculinity where you're using deception to it's not authentic. Sometimes these things get really complicated because sometimes you have to dig really deep and reflect really deep to take a look at like, what am I truly honestly doing? Do you know this principle of sometimes you can have two different intentions and the exact same actions that you do, the exact same words that you speak. But if your intention is different, in the eyes of the universe, it is different. Can you recognize that? And can you also recognize how incredibly hard that is? Because you can't really see that from the outside. Maybe if you're a psychologist and then you analyze someone like really, really well on like a video, or you listen exactly to what they do, like whatever, maybe you can like suss it out, but it's really subtle. Yet the intention makes a difference, right? Because short term, you might get the same result, but the intention long term, of course, changes. So this all boils down to undefining masculinity completely, in the sense of like loosening this entire armor so something real can breathe. And that gets to nihilism. Remember my episode about nihilism, that sometimes it's really, really important to tear all of these structures down to like really see, okay, well, the academic man is a myth, it's a concept. The competitive man is like, or the aggressive one, or like whatever, however you want to name them, they're all concepts. They're all, you know uh, uh, models of interacting with reality. And it doesn't really matter which one you pick. If you follow it dogmatically, like it doesn't matter. There's no essential difference really between choosing the script of like a competitive man or an academic man. Like, for example, like I've switched a little bit. Like I used to be really identified with, because that's how I was brought up, with intelligence. So what was very important for me is like whenever I would walk in a room, that I would that it would be known that I was quite intelligent. What have you know? Um, and the interesting thing is that, of course, that element is still present, but it's a part that's just like kind of like what I was fed with the oatmeal spoon, as they say in Dutch. It's just like my upbringing that got handed to me. That's the way that I communicate and talk to people. And to a certain extent, you can't like completely revert it. Like it's now like sort of like part of me. Like I'm an academic person and I like knowledge and I am bookish and like all these different things. And yes, like I can reason pretty well as well. Like that's it. I don't um it's not as important to me anymore. Like it's not like I won't be snubbed now if someone thinks that I'm stupid or something like that, or doesn't know that I'm Italian or something along those lines. And I also know that there's many limits to that. Like I have a certain type of intelligence, but there's many types of intelligences. I happen to be pretty good at like sort of reasoning, abstracting, etc. But I'm not really good at like facts or something like that. If I go to like bar trivia, like, you can like sweep the floor with me. I'm like useless there. It's a little Dutch expression for you, that you know um, sweep the floor with me. Like I'm not competitive in that sense. So yeah, no, they're and as I started to go more from like using words and intelligence towards more like being really identified with athletic achievements, because I started running a lot and doing ultras and like weightlifting and knowing a lot. Like now I have a lot of body intelligence, right? Like where at first, like in my earlier parts of life, do you know this concept where you just like you don't really have that much body awareness, and one of the cool things of running, lifting weights, whatever, your connection with your body is just becomes better, so that your body is not just like a vessel for your brain or something like that, which is like missing the point. I think the entire thing needs to be integrated. So as that changed, like some of that, how that fit into the man script also change, right? Because now, from an athletic perspective, I can stand my ground a lot better than, like I don't know, 20 years ago or something like that. That would have been like no no point of like really trying to do that. I could like hike pretty well and I ate pretty decent. I actually was raised with really good nutritional standards, so that's just something I got for free, which is actually really nice to have, like a really decent um that you know how to like feed yourself properly and that you're not just eating McDonald's all the time. But anyways, I super digress. It's all about the nihilism. The point is that there's all kinds of like man boxes that you can define. There's not just the one man box, I would say, but they all roll up into structures anyway, and you need to break that shit down. Whatever the shit is for you. No matter if you're on the academic side, or maybe you're on the creative side, or maybe you're on the athletic side, it doesn't matter. Like ultimately these things need to be torn down. And what needs to be built up is something that is related to your own values. And of course, the values are still interconnected to your upbringing, but at least you're being honest. It's not a dogmatic following off. It's more like these are the elements that I choose. And I know everything is arbitrary. So there's not like one thing that's better than another thing from an absolute perspective. You can claim from an absolute perspective, you don't know, and it doesn't matter, right? So within the relative field, we can still make choices. So these are the choices that I'm making. This is what I find important. And within that context, I would say when it comes to being a man, masculinity, or something like that, shifting from a what can I get to a what can I give perspective. What can I get? Think of Donald Trump. Donald Trump asks continuously, what can I get? I want a ballroom. What can I get? What can I get? Sure, it's like there's some veneer around it, and I don't want to get political. Um, but okay, sorry. It's just like such a poignant example. Do you think that Donald Trump really asks about what can I give? He talks about that, but like really, I don't get the impression that that's something that he wakes up. It's something that he actually values. And what I'm presenting to you is that a lot of more satisfaction, happiness, meaning from your life can come from going in that direction of like, what can I get? How can I cheat the system? How can I get into the pants of this woman? To what can I give? What's actually the thing that I can provide? And provide in a way, not in like this narrow provide ways, like, but it's like more in a broader sense. Sometimes, if I'm talking about providing and giving or something like that, you can get into like a resentment mode, because if you only give, 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 and you never get back, that's not really what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that in this world, there, by and large, for most people, especially men, you automatically already think about what you can get enough as it is. You don't have to double down on that. That will take care of itself. So and it's all about doing that in a conscious sense. It doesn't mean that you're going into a direction of people pleasing now. It's like, what can I give? Like, sort of give with a capital G. It's like, how can I move things? Like, what can I give in line with the values that I have? Not like, can I give like a sandwich to that guy over here and money to that woman over? No, it's more like, what am I here on the planet to provide? Like, what's my unique gift, or what is my unique values that what can I provide? Yeah, I don't know why I feel that that doesn't explain it well enough. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Who knows? Because a lot of the male socialization centers on acquisition, status, money, sex, dominance, success, right? The pivot is service and reciprocity. Ask it everywhere, at work, at gym, in bed, to yourself when you're meditating. Ask it to yourself. Don't just give to others. Give counterintuitively, what can I give to myself as well, to like my sort of like higher self, something that I'm thinking on the direction of growing, right? Like, how can I invest in myself? How can I give that creates connection, not martyrdom, contribution? So I think that that's important. I have a couple of smaller things that are also important that I took away after like ingesting all of these things. I think language matters. I have decided to dial down the crush, kill, destroy metaphors. I also have a corporate job, and that's often used. Oh, he killed it at this meeting, blah, 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 blah. I've decided to stop. I will use excelled, showed up, led well. I will I will drop fucks for punch. I don't have anything against dropping F bombs, but not just as the oxygen of your identity. And to repeat, sort of a repetition, I went a little off script there. Assume less, connect more. Find connection in classic toxic male settings. Don't assume that there's going to be no connection and no one willing to engage in vulnerable sharing, because interestingly enough, we are regressing and also we're moving forward. Like, right, like with the whole political situation here in the United States, obviously we're like turning the clock back to the 60s, or some people are trying that. But interestingly, as a counter movement, there there is a counter movement that reacts to that force with equal force the other direction. So even if it's like classic settings, like a sales dinner with tech bros, stay curious and name what you appreciate. Ask the real question that you're afraid to ask. I have a new thing that I'm doing. I have that on my. I like lists. I've talked about this in my four feel good molecules episode. Keeping to-do lists so that you get a little dopamine when you check something off. And I have a recurring one where every day I have one that says, "Do the thing you don't want to do." This is another example. Ask a question you're afraid to ask. That can be the thing that you don't want to do. When you're like, I am a fan of athletic performance. I love running, weightlifting, climbing, like all of these things. It's wonderful biking. Do it for. I intend to. I'll keep doing it with gusto, although it is part of the manuscript. It happens to be something where we overlap. So I do it for longevity. I do it for presence. I do it for the mental health benefits. I do it for aesthetic reasons as well. But the focus is tracking on how I feel. How do I sleep? How's my mood? How's my patience? More than ego lifting. Did I run faster? Did I do more weight? Did I do more reps? Um, did I gain muscle mass? Did I lose body fat? Like all these things are secondary. Of course, redefining sexual norms. So holding enthusiastic consent and mutual pleasure as the standard. And for me, that's open conversation, sober choices. And I don't mean not drinking alcohol, although I don't not mean not drinking alcohol, but just love with lust. Um, no, no prude perspective here. Just interestingly enough, in this whole movement of me dealing with my porn use and the shame around that, the interesting thing on the other side of it, now that it's so much easier for me to talk about that, is that I'm actually feeling much more open to be more explorative in that sense. To instead of, I would have expected that that would have resulted in me like sort of like calming down, because like porn was this like wild thing where you do weird stuff and you can get like weird stuff on the internet. We all know that. So I thought that if I could shut that down, that things would look very, very different, very more vanilla. But like the reverse is true, right? Of course, because that interest is in myself. The important thing to do it in a way that it's in line with connection and with a real person. For the rest, like that expression is wonderful. That's why I'm like really underlying. Do all the freaky things. Do your kinky stuff. Go to sex parties. Go to Burning Man and have a threesome. I think all of these things are wonderful if that is something that you're authentically interested in, not because that is a hallmark of being a real man or some shit like that. If that's really something that gives you the zhuzh, as my acting teacher calls it, go for it. And don't let yourself be stopped by shame. Counterintuitively. Uh, let's see. Am I going to talk about that? Sure. Dual control model. I don't know why I have that here exactly, but this is by Emily Nagoski. I love Emily Nagoski. Sex educator, wrote a bunch of books. In her model, she talks about accelerators and brakes and arousal non-concordance, which means that you can't let your genitals tell you if you want sex. Like if your dick's hard or your vagina is wet, that doesn't mean you want sex. It's just your body is responding to some stimuli that to your body feel like appropriate, but that doesn't mean like your words say yes and your genitals do not say yes or no. That's not how that works. That's what she talks about a lot. And also, what makes it then very important is to translate that into practice and to talk about your partner. What are their brakes? What are their accelerators? Ask, listen, and just have the conversation about that. Like I don't know. That's important. I wish I started doing that way, way earlier in life. And that's scary. And it's vulnerable. It's much easier to like do shit and not talk about it. And it's, believe me, much, 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 much easier to just, lock yourself up in the closet at Friday night and just like find it on the internet. That's the fucking easiest thing in the world. Bringing it out in the real world, now that's much more important. Let that part of you have a seat at the table. Don't lock it up in the closet. That's what I would say there. And push back on the real man story without turning it into a ruse. Like I said, no sneaky fucker energy, that subtle self betrayal where you tell yourself you're being mindful, chill, feminist, pro women, or just going with the flow, but deep now you fucking know you're manipulating the situation to get your emotional hit. Sex, control, validation, attention, success, whatever your drug of choice is. It's the unconscious hustle of the ego wearing a spiritual hoodie, pretending to be calm while it's actually scheming. You know that when you're doing it. Don't fuck around. Don't do that. Be honest with yourself. Don't perform sensitivity as a tactic to still get dominance. Drop the hustle for approval. Avoid dogma. I've said that in multiple different ways. The whole man box, the whole patriarchy, like whatever. That is dogma. It's your job to lead with intention. Going straight against the man box is not what I'm talking about. That is you're still, you're eating the dogma. You can become a red pillar in that way. So it doesn't work like that. You can't just take an existing dogma and do the exact opposite. You have to think about your exact intentions. You have to think about your values. Rules help until they don't. I'm not saying that dogma is evil and it's never useful, but you get at one point in life, you have to know that dogma doesn't get there. It's not a rule book that you can just follow and it will cover everything. It's more like a framework that as you become sufficient or become more effective in life, you follow. And then you have to throw the rules away. It's just, I don't know why it works like that, but it does. Notice when your rule following becomes control. It still happens to me every day. So I'm not beyond this at all. That's not the right word, beyond. There's another word. Like superior to that. Anyways. Keep thinking for yourself, boys and girls. Karma. I must have talked about this before. Karma as doing. Karma is not cosmic punishment. It's what's to be done, what's on the slate for you. You burn through your action and you reflect on that. So that means that you don't have to be perfect. You just have to own your shit and do better than the last iteration. That iteration can be last week. That iteration can be a past life. If that's how you like to think about it. I don't give a shit. That doesn't matter as long as you're engaging with that feedback loop, being sure what you're learning. And the takeaway is you don't have to be perfect. The entire act of self-actualization is burning through karma. You have to go through all these different stages. So don't hate on yourself for not doing it right the first time. I surely don't. I fuck up all the time. So that's today's journey. From the cramped walls of the man box through porn scripts, hookup culture, into the loneliness beneath the armor, finally towards a masculinity that doesn't need domination to feel alive. This work, I've said it before, it's not easy. It isn't instant. It's worth your whole life because it is your whole life. For you, it's just you have to notice the bullshit, you have to question the inheritance, you have to practice the skills that bring you back to yourself authentically and the people you love. Connection. We are human. Connection is incredibly important. That, you know, speaking of values, speaking of like effectiveness, you can disagree with me. You can be a super introvert and you can think that connection is like whatever. I don't give a shit. That's true for you. Wonderful. You don't have to agree with me, but I do want you to reflect on it, to check. And it can be good to be inspired by something, right? You can be like, huh, that's an interesting thought that Vincent just shared. Let's see if that holds up for me. Remember, performance without presence is hollow, doesn't just come to sex. What matters isn't whether you look like a man or provide like a man or whatever like a man. What matters is that whether or not you can sit down in your own skin, connect honestly with those around you, and keep choosing growth over armor. Thank you for listening to the Meaningful Shit Show. Now go do the work. See you next time. And this was Vincent.